In this video, I'll be taking you through perhaps one of the most widely used human investigative methods for the paper 4 Cambridge IGCSE, which is questionnaire. The purpose of this video really is that when you have a past paper open in front of you and you have questions related to a questionnaire, you are able to use this video to help you answer questions that you perhaps are struggling with. So I don't go through specific papers because there's just so much variety for this paper, but what I do go through is an outline of the method with general points for you to use to help you approach all of the past questions that have been asked about a questionnaire. So again, the onus is on you to practice, practice, practice. So why the method only? Again, just to recap so it's all clear. Human investigations tend to use similar methods. There are far too many variations of human investigations, so each method has very specific points. So what you need to do to carry out a pedestrian count land use map questionnaire, there are similar points that can be applied to any type of investigation. So again, use this video to help you approach questions related to a questionnaire. But if you need other questions that you come across, please do use my other videos to help you. So what is a questionnaire? Questionnaire is, generally speaking, when you go out to collect that, is primary data. You are going out collecting data from people. So therefore, you have written pre-designed questions and you're using those questions to gather data from a selected sample of respondents. A questionnaire really is you gathering people's opinions, attitudes, experiences and behaviours related to specific geographical topics. So it could be on why people go on holiday, the type of people that visit a shop. These are all can be answered by using questionnaires. And remember, the reason it's primary data is because it's fresh and first-hand information that's directly relevant to the investigation. The questionnaire you have designed is specifically for your investigation, and that is important. There are many different forms of questionnaires. It could be done online, it could be an interview, it can be done in person, over the phone, in the mail, and there's all strengths and weaknesses of using each type. But what we're going to be focusing on is, which for you, I think it'll be very good for you to go out and do this, but what we are going to be focusing on is the core, it's the general things that you can do. So how do we go about carrying out a questionnaire? Remember, these questions are what's unique to paper 4. Paper 4 requires you to maybe answer some questions from knowledge based from paper 1. It could do that in the start of paper 2 questions, but this is the specific content that you need to learn for this paper. So types of hypotheses that you can see. Generally, if you read them, here they require you to find out different opinions. You are finding out if one area is more popular than another, or you get a general overview about a particular issue or something for a country. So remember about a questionnaire, there are two broad types of questions that you use within a questionnaire: closed and open-ended questions, and you need to be able to tell the difference between the two. Closed questions are examples that you can see here. They are specific options or choices for respondents to select from, or they could even just be simple, where have you travelled from, city, region, write that down. They're designed to gather precise and standardised information. So, how have you arrived in this town today, method of transport, car, that is precise information. I want to know the number of cars that people used. You do need to be careful how you write the categories. So for example, here you could put 1 to 3 days, 3 to 7 days. So if you stay for 3 days, what do you tick? That's why we put 1 to 3 days, 4 to 7 days. And there are loads of different types of questions that you can use: simple yes or no, tick box, one or multiple choices, and remember, it's important, as you can see here in some cases, to give clear instruction. So there are types of closed questions. You could also, if you're gathering opinions or choices for respondents to select from, you can use something which is called the Likert scale, and not very important, not important, important, very important, don't know. So these don't know. These are examples of different ways of gathering closed questions. Open-ended questions really are, it's when you want a subjective response. You just want to have an opinion about an issue. These are not restricted to specific options or choices, so pretty much, what do you think about this? They give you some ideas. And what you would do to analyse that, you would have to read all of the various responses and then pick out potentially key themes and quote those. So if you were to compare the two, these are sort of the key strengths and weaknesses of using each type of question. So have a pause, have a read. Anything you don't understand, please do search it up. So what types of questions could you be asked on this? Well, these are two that I've got. I'm going to go through them now. One of them is trying to work out the two missing age groups. First thing to do is look at the difference between the ages that you've been given. So we've got 40 years, 2 spaces. So each little space has to be over a span of 20 years. It doesn't say 60 and over, and it doesn't say 20 and under. So the first numbers and the last numbers are going to be 20 and 60. So I'm going to write something like this: 20 to 40, 41 to 60, and here we go. So if we continue, we've got the same again. We've got difference of 30 years, 2 spaces, 15 years for each, 60 not included, so I can do something like this. Remember, I do 31 to 45, 46 to 60, so if anyone's got the age of 45, they have one clear category. And the answers are there for you. So what makes a good questionnaire? So have a little think, pause the video, have a little think, and see if you've had some examples. You hopefully have got an example out in front of you. So have a look at that and think about why is that a good questionnaire. So here are 2 for you. What unites these 2 questionnaires is that they both have a clear introduction to explain to the person what they're doing, and they also have a polite ending to that. So if we can look at what makes a good questionnaire, we can see, as it says in the mark scheme, contains introduction and includes thanks at the end. There are other really important points that you can mention. I quite like the idea of simple language, easy to read and follow, and then you've got plenty of space to record your information. Right, moving on, and this is something that plays a big role with questionnaires, is sampling. It's identifying the people that you want to answer the questionnaire. So let's just go through the various different types of sampling. So we've got systematic, which is nice and straightforward. So these are where observations or people are asked at regular intervals. So for example, I could ask the 5th person. And so that means that event, hopefully you can avoid bias because you're just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, I'll ask the 5th person. Random sampling is where everyone has an equal chance of being selected. So you just ask people, just stop people in the streets and ask them what they are. Stratified sampling is when you try and group people into different categories. So it could be age ranges, it could be ethnicity, it could be gender, and then you select a key number of people from each one. You can mix it up, so you've got stratified random sampling. It's something like this, where you just, a person from a different group has got an equal chance of being selected. Or again, you see, right, there are 4 old people walking past, I'm going to ask the 3rd person. But when you're comparing them, it is important to know that there are various strengths and weaknesses of using each one. So again, can you please pause the video and have a little read to make sure you understand what are the key advantages and disadvantages. So some other things to consider when it comes to sampling. Large sample sizes are more accurate representations of the whole group of population. If you are trying to do a whole town about people's opinions about building a new road, you are not going to ask 5 people. You're going to try and get a decent proportion of that town's population. And so you also, but when you do that, you need to take into account how much time do you have to collect the data. Can you access the locations? And by making sure that your sample size avoids bias. Typically, sort of the slow moving, the older people are more likely to be the ones to stop, and so they are the ones that are more likely to ask questionnaires. Working people are less likely if you're doing it at, say, 9 o'clock in the morning. So these are all the various things that you need to consider. So let's look at some exam questions on sampling. First ones, as you can see here, is why did the researchers need to use a sample of people? What does primary data mean? What does secondary data mean? So you should be able to sort of think about why we'd take a sample. It takes too much time to ask everyone. Primary data is where it's collected by the researchers themselves, and secondary data is by other sources of information. So again, have a little look, pause the video, take some notes on why we do a sample of people and the key differences between primary and secondary data. If we move on again about, some questions might ask you to refer to, identifying a sample size. You know, in this case, why is 20 people too small? Why are 500 people too big? And so again, you need to remember, what do we mean by sample size? And remember that the sample size needs to be reliable. So by taking a certain number of people, I need to know that should be reflective of the whole population. So again, here 20 people for 500 of a sample of 500 people in total is just too small. It's not enough for a reliable sample. To ask all 500 people simply will take too much time to ask everyone. And again here, these are the various points that you need to consider. Well, what happens if the sample's too small, and why you don't ask everyone. Other questions might be asking you to, as you can see here, identify, name and describe a suitable sampling method that they could use to select their sample size, in this case 50 workers. When it comes to these type of questions, I think it's really important to focus generally on systematic versus random. I think stratify is too hard to do. So in this case, systematic sampling, like you can see there, is if you know I want to take 50 for my sample size and the total's 400 people, therefore I'm going to ask 1 in every 8th person. So as that person's walking in, I'm going to select the 8th person. And then you've got next 7, select the 8th, next 7, select the 8th. Random sampling is when you keep on going until you get to 50 people. For me, I think systematic sampling is the easiest to explain. So I go, systematic sampling is this, description of sampling method, I would ask every 8th person. And why I selected this method? Well, it avoids bias and it's quick to implement. As you can see on the mark scheme, ticks all those boxes for there, but I've left the points for what you do for random and what you could put for stratified sampling to add to your notes overall that you could use to apply to any investigation. Another method might just simply be asking you to identify one and then describe the sampling method below. So again, here I've put on the sampling methods and then just a simple description that you make sure that you can include into your notes. And again, you have to be aware of the advantages and disadvantages of using a particular method. So here you would do, if it's every 5th person, that's systematic, and these are the advantages of using a systematic approach. So again, in your notes, you've got the 3 methods, you have a definition, you have an example of what that could look like, and then you've got advantages and disadvantages. If you have that, you should be able to apply that to any question that asks you to take into account sampling. Again, it might give you that, actually have to, and this is where you see here, a poor sampling method. Here, you've been asked to focus on all mothers. Well, not all mothers will meet outside the local school. It could be fathers that go there. It could be grandparents. It could be a babysitter. So it's a poor method to just target all mothers. So again, that would be reflective. It's only using the questionnaires with mothers. It does not take answers or opinions from males, other females, or other people that take their children to school. It's only using the local school location, so it's not particularly good, and it produces a narrow range of answers. So again, consider what the key strengths and weaknesses are of using each sampling method. Make sure you can do that with examples. If we move on, again, describe a good sampling method that the researchers could use to choose a representative sample of people to answer the questionnaire. Explain why this would be a good method to use. Again, I've given you another example, some more ideas of notes you can put into your particular revision strategies and whatever you're doing to revise for this part of the course. And again, when you've got a question like this, describe a good sampling method. Just to recap, state what that method is, if it's stratified, systematic, or random. If it's whatever they are, systematic sampling, choose residents at regular intervals. You're using the words from the questions, from the questionnaire in your answer. You might be asked to look at risk assessments here. I haven't found that many questions on risk, but they could be asked. So again, if you're out and about doing questionnaires, you need to think about the temperature, dress appropriately, bearing in mind the weather changes, time of day. There are risks doing questionnaires late at night and in particular locations. Consider traffic, what happens to avoid yourself getting lost, and are all of the areas accessible and safe to go to. So these are the things you consider when it comes to risk. Some very popular questions look at what we mean by a pilot study. So a pilot study is where you do this before the main investigation. Basically, these are the points that we consider, that we are aware of. And so, you know, when it comes to a questionnaire, you should be able to apply these generic points to a questionnaire. And so we're going to go through some of that now. Here's some examples of the following ideas that the teacher suggested that the student does. So I've talked about the first questions that you can read here. When would you go about asking people, why would you avoid, so why, if you're going to target working people, why would you do that the weekend in a particular town? Because working age population are unlikely to be available during working days. And at the bottom question's a really nice one as well, because it looks at, you know, things to do and things not to do when using a questionnaire. So I've given you the points here with the mark scheme. Another common question that again is, how could the students make sure that they only use their questionnaire of people who lived in the town? I can't believe this is one mark because it's nice and simple. You ask. Okay, so if we move on. It's just 3 pieces of advice which the teacher gave to the students about using the questionnaire with people who are shopping. So what things do you consider? These are the various points that you need to do. What I've done is I've highlighted key points that you must do every time you ask a questionnaire. And again, this is why you do a pilot, to work out, have the people done this? Have they considered this before they've gone out and actually asked these questions? So when they do go out, they're able to collect the best and most reliable data possible. So have a little pause, add these to your notes. Okay, other things as well. It asks you to consider, you know, explains why the teacher made the suggestion. So a teacher has put suggestions for how they can improve their questionnaire. So have a little read. Of course, I'm only going to ask, you know, this questionnaire can apply to both hypotheses, which you've seen. If not, open up the paper to have a look, but generally speaking, you ask questionnaires that can be applied to different types of investigations. And if it's focused on having migrated within Egypt, of course you're going to ask if the person is a tourist, because if they are not a tourist, you're not going to continue asking the question because you only want to have local people. Again, the teacher might ask, you know, or in this case, the teacher's suggested to add a question. So why would they do that? Well, here, are you a tourist or do you live in Mauritius? So that's a good question to know, because if you're doing a tourist questionnaire, you only want to focus on tourists, but also you can work out the ratio a little bit of tourists to locals. So here are some points to consider. Right, so how do we go about carrying out a questionnaire? I've given you 2 questions from 2 different years, similar points for you to work out. So I've put the mark schemes here for you to have a little read. So drawing on that, we're going to have a look. I think when it says, I do think you need to include sampling. I think that's a really important point to do. So a model answer would be, you would carry out a questionnaire that targets whatever your hypothesis suggests. So I put some ideas there for you. You would use a range of closed response questions such as, and so it's good to always put some questions that you would ask. And you would mention that you would carry out the interview at different times of the day, such as whatever, this is because, and then you might talk about how you would go about selecting people to answer your questionnaire. And so you could mention the types of sampling technique. Even if it's not in the mark scheme, it's always good to know, because some years, as you've seen there, it is. Now, another question that's been very popular with questionnaires is talking about how you can use a questionnaire to work out the sphere of influence. So again, taking this lovely diagram from Save My Exams, just to recap what we mean by sphere of influence. Have a little read, pause the video, make sure that's clear in your head, and then we can move on. So here we go. So describing methods the students could carry out to investigate the sphere of influence of the CPD. So the sphere of influence is the area served by a particular place or service. So essentially, I want to work out how far have people travelled. So remember, I've got a questionnaire. I'm going to talk about sampling, examples of questions, and how they can be used to make sure I can answer this question, to work out how far have people travelled to go and use a shop, to visit the CPD in this case, and what I would do. So a modern answer would be, a questionnaire could be used to find out the sphere of influence of the CPD. I have to describe a method, therefore I need to state that method. And this is what I could do this is what I would then write to make sure I can work out the sphere of influence. I've talked about randomly ask people, the types of questions that would be useful for this, and then how I would go about using that data to work out the sphere of influence. Here is the mark scheme, ticking all the boxes. Similar question again, describe how the students could use the questions to how they use the answers to the questions, not write a questionnaire, but use the answers to certain questions to work out the sphere of influence of 2 shopping centres. Remember the definition. I'm going to show its location on a map. That's the outline of the districts of Bangkok. And then for each district, calculate the total who came from each one. Use choropleth shading to show the number of people visited. And then draw a line around the furthest away districts to show the sphere of influence. And there we go. Quite a little tricky question I saw here was actually evaluating the responses that you got. So let's go through, and this is where you have to be really methodical. You go through each question looking at have they done everything that's been required of them and have they followed the instruction. So if we look at figure 2.8 here, okay, are you visited to Singapore? Yes. Which age group are you in? Correct. Which city airport did you travel from? That's being left blank. Therefore, that is the error. Okay, so for the next question, it asks me to go through that again. So, first one, correct. Second one, correct. Third and fourth, correct. What is your main reason for coming to Singapore? So that requires you to tick 1. They've ticked 3. That must be the issue. And we move on to the final one. Okay, first one correct, second one correct. Which city airport did you travel from? USA. USA is not a city, it is a country. All correct. So what I've done is now I've given you some practice questions for you to do. So you can watch the video, answer, pause it, have a go at answering them, and then do the next set, pause, do, and then all the answers at the end of this little section for you. So first question. Pause now. Second question, set of questions, pause, complete. Another couple of questions. And the final one. Okay, here are the mark schemes. So pause now and mark. Add to your notes if you get anything wrong or any misconceptions. Final set. Okay. Now, data presentation questions. When I was having a look at this, to be honest, I've covered all of them that have been used or associated with them in my other video, which I've put there, as you can see. So have a go on my channel and have a little look through that for you. So another common question that is a skill that has a very set way of doing it is proving hypothesis questions. So when you get those questions, essentially you need to have a read and ask yourself, what do you need to do? Does it require you to actually state if it's true, false, partially true, or has that already been written? And then you need to give evidence to whatever the hypothesis has been proven or what you think it shows. So let's look at this simple question for 3 marks. Okay, I included the pie chart, but when you look at this question, you had to complete it. I haven't done that. I'm just going to use the data below. So, using my model, what do you need to do? I need to state what conclusion the student has made. So is it true, false, partially true? And I need to have some evidence to support what I think. So looking at the data, the hypothesis is false. Why? This is because the majority of people, 53% of the responses, stated they have lived in the town for more than 20 years. And this is what the mark scheme says, so that's all correct. Get 1 mark for stating the hypothesis is false, true, or partially true, using some data and then making the sweeping statement based on the hypothesis. So again here, the physical landscape attracts more tourists in Mauritius than the human landscape. I need to support my decision. So what do I need to do? I need to state if it's true, false, partially true. They haven't told me if it's true, false, or partially true. I need to get some evidence. Now, figures 2.3 and 2.4 required me to complete the graphs based on the data below. So I'm just going to use the data below. Hypothesis is true. This is because there were more visits to physical landscape attractions, 290 visits, than human landscape attractions, 204 as well. The top 3 visitor attractions were all physical. So 1 mark for stating it's true, 1 mark for stating there are more visits to physical than human. I've included some data and I've sort of made another statement about the top 3. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this useful as you're going through past questions about questionnaires. Please do use the chapters to help you. If you found this really useful, please do share it with your friends. and so you can help them as well. And again, please do like the video if you found it useful so other people can see, and comment if you notice anything. I always try and get back to you. And remember, this is us working together to get you the best possible marks from your exam. Thank you again.